Hello, everybody. So, keeping up with our regularly scheduled book, Opal is already of the opinion that we should be in bed, so I can't promise another 4 chapters, but we'll see how much we can get done. So, anyway, we are back to Coraline, starting on chapter 5. Coraline locked the door of the drawing room with the cold black key. She went back into the kitchen and climbed onto a chair. She tried to put the bunch of keys back on top of the doorframe again. She tried 4 or 5 times before she was forced to accept that she just wasn't big enough, and she put them down on the counter next to the door. Her mother still hadn't returned from her shopping expedition. Coraline went to the freezer and took out the spare loaf of frozen bread in the bottom compartment. She made herself some toast with jam and peanut butter. She drank a glass of water. She waited for her parents to come back. When it began to get dark, Coraline microwaved herself a frozen pizza. Then, Coraline watched television. She wondered why grown ups gave themselves all the good programs with all the shouting and running around in. After a while, she started yawning. Then she undressed, brushed her teeth, and put herself to bed. In the morning, she went into her parents' room, but their bed hadn't been slept in, and they weren't around. She ate canned spaghetti for breakfast. For lunch, she had a block of cooking chocolate and an apple. The apple was yellow and slightly shriveled, but it tasted sweet and good. For tea, she went down to see Mrs. Spink and Forcible. She had 3 digestive biscuits, a glass of limeade, and a cup of weak tea. The limeade was very interesting. It didn't taste anything like limes. It tasted like bright green and vaguely chemical. Coraline liked it enormously. She wished they had it at home. "How are your dear mother and father?" asked Mrs. Spink. "Missing," said Coraline. "I haven't seen either of them since yesterday. I'm on my own, and I think I've probably become a single-child family." "Oh, tell your mother that we found the Glasgow Empire press clippings that we were telling her about. She seemed very interested when Miriam mentioned them to her." "She's vanished under mysterious circumstances," said Coraline, "and I believe my father has as well." "I'm afraid we'll be out all day tomorrow, Caroline. Caroline Lovey," said Miss Forcible. "We'll be staying over with April's niece in the Royal Tunbridge Wells." They showed Coraline a photographic album with photographs of Miss Spink's niece in it, and then Coraline went home. She opened her money box and walked down to the supermarket. She bought 2 large bottles of limeade, a chocolate cake, and a new bag of apples, and went back home and ate them for dinner. Then she cleaned her teeth and went into her father's office. She woke up his computer and wrote a story. Coraline's story. There was a girl, and her name was Apple. She used to dance a lot. She danced and danced until her feet turned into sausages. The end. She printed out the story and turned off the computer. Then she drew a picture of a little girl dancing underneath the words on the paper. She ran herself a bath with too many bubbles in it, and the bubbles ran over the side and went all over the floor. She dried herself and the floor as best she could, and she went to bed. Coraline woke up in the night. She went into her parents' bedroom, but the bed was made and empty. The glowing green numbers on the digital clock glowed 3:12 a.m. All alone in the middle of the night, Coraline began to cry. There was no other sound in the empty flat. She climbed into her parents' bed, and after a while, she went to sleep. Coraline was woken by cold paws batting at her face. She opened her eyes. Big green eyes stared back at her. It was the cat. "Hello," said Coraline. "How did you get in?" The cat didn't say anything. Coraline got out of bed. She was wearing a long t-shirt and pajama bottoms. "Have you come to tell me something?" The cat yawned, which made its eyes flash green. "Do you know where my mommy and daddy are?" The cat blinked at her slowly. "Is that a yes?" The cat blinked again. Coraline decided that that was indeed a yes. "Will you take me to them?" The cat stared at her. Then it walked out into the hall. She followed it. It walked along the length of the corridor and stopped down at the very end, where a full-length mirror hung. The mirror had been for a long time before on the inside of a wardrobe door. It had been hanging there on the wall when they moved in, and although Coraline's mother had spoken occasionally of replacing it with something newer she never had. Coraline turned on the light in the hall. The mirror showed the corridor behind her. That was only to be expected. But reflected in the mirror were her parents. They stood awkwardly in the reflection of the hall. They seemed sad and alone. As Coraline watched, they waved to her, slowly, with limp hands. Coraline's father had his arm around her mother. In the mirror, Coraline's mother and father stared at her. Her father opened his mouth and said something, but she could hear nothing at all. Her mother breathed on the inside of the mirror glass, and quickly, before the fog faded, she wrote. Help us. With the tip of her forefinger. The fog on the inside of the mirror faded, and so did her parents, and now the mirror reflected only the corridor and Coraline and the cat. "Where are they?" Coraline asked the cat. The cat made no reply, but Coraline could imagine its voice, dry as a dead fly sitting on a windowsill in winter, saying, "Well, where do you think they are?" "They aren't going to come back, are they?" said Coraline. "Not under their own steam." The cat blinked at her. Coraline took it as a yes. "Right," said Coraline. "Then I suppose there's only one thing left to do." She walked into her father's study. She sat down at his desk. Then she picked up the telephone and opened the phone book and telephoned the local police station. "Police," said a gruff male voice. "Hello," she said. "My name is Coraline Jones." "You're up a bit after your bedtime, aren't you, young lady?" said the policeman. "Possibly," said Coraline, who was not going to be diverted. "But I am ringing to report a crime." "What sort of crime would that be?" "Kidnapping. Grown up napping, really. My parents have been stolen away into a world on the other side of the mirror in our hall." "And do you know who stole them?" asked the police officer. Coraline could hear the smile in his voice, and she tried extra hard to sound like an adult might sound to make him take her seriously. "I think my other mother has them both in her clutches. She may want to keep them and sew their eyes with black buttons, or she may simply have them in order to lure me back into the reach of her fingers. I'm not sure." "Ah, the nefarious clutches of her fiendish fingers, is it?" he said. "You know what I suggest, Miss Jones?" "No," said Coraline. "What?" "You ask your mother to make you a big old mug of hot chocolate, and then give you a great big old hug. There's nothing like hot chocolate and a hug for making the nightmares go away. And if she starts to tell you off for waking her up at this time of night, why, you tell her that that's what the policeman said." He had a deep, reassuring voice. But Coraline was not reassured. "When I see her," said Coraline, "I shall tell her that." And she put down the telephone. "We're not going to bed yet." "You are such a bossy pupper. You are so bossy. And so full of love. How can I do this to you? I'm so mean. I just ignore your needs all the time. It's the worst. I love you." "Well, you know, I did say I would give you a cookie after." "Okay, I'll give you a cookie. I'll give you a cookie because you are being well behaved. I love you." My hand's stuck. My hand's stuck. I fought the box, and the box lost. The black cat, who had sat on the floor grooming its fur through this entire conversation, now stood up and led the way back into the hall. Coraline went back into her bedroom and put on her blue dressing gown and her slippers. She looked under her sink for a flashlight and found one, but the batteries had long since run down, and it barely glowed with the faintest straw-colored light. She put it down again and found a box of in case of emergency white wax candles, and thrust one into a candlestick. She put an apple into each pocket. She picked up the ring of keys and took the old black key off the ring. She walked into the drawing room and looked at the door. She had the feeling that the door was looking at her, which she knew was silly, and knew on a deeper level that it was somehow true. She went back into her bedroom and rummaged in the pocket of her jeans. She found the stone with the hole in it and put it into her dressing gown pocket. She lit the candle wick with a match and watched it sputter and light. Then she picked up the black key. It was cold in her hand. She put it into the keyhole in the door, but she did not turn the key. "When I was a little girl," said Coraline to the cat, "when we lived in our old house, a long, long time ago, my dad took me for a walk on the wasteland between our house and the shops. It wasn't the best place to go for a walk, really. There were all these things that people had thrown away back there, old cookers and broken dishes and dolls with no arms and no legs and empty cans and broken bottles. Mom and Dad made me promise not to go exploring back there because there were too many sharp things and tetanus and such. But I kept telling them I wanted to explore it. So one day my dad put on his big brown boots and his gloves and put my boots on me and my jeans and sweater, and we went for a walk. Must have walked for about 20 minutes. We went down this hill to the bottom of a gully where the stream was when my dad suddenly said to me, 'Coraline, run away, up the hill, now!' He said it in a tight sort of way, urgently, so I did. I ran away up the hill. Something hurt me on the back of my arm as I ran, but I kept running. As I got to the top of the hill, I heard somebody thundering up the hill behind me. It was my dad charging like a rhino. When he reached me, he picked me up in his arms and swept me over the edge of the hill. And when we stopped, he puffed and he panted, and we looked back down the gully. The air was alive with yellow wasps. We must have stepped on a wasp's nest in a broken branch as we walked. And while I was running up the hill, my dad stayed and got stung to give me time to run away. His glasses had fallen off as he ran. I only had the one sting on the back of my arm. He had 39 stings all over him. We counted later, in the bath." The black cat began to wash its face and whiskers in a manner that indicated increasing impatience. Coraline reached down and stroked the back of its head and neck. The cat stood up, walked several paces until it was out of her reach, and then sat down and looked up at her again. "So," said Coraline, "later that afternoon my dad went back to the wasteland to get his glasses back. He said if he left it another day he wouldn't be able to remember where they'd fallen. And soon he got home wearing his glasses. He said that he wasn't scared when he was standing there and the wasps were stinging him and hurting him and he was watching me run away because he knew he had to give me enough time to run or the wasps would have come after both of us." Coraline turned the key in the door and turned it with a loud clunk. The door swung open. There was no brick wall on the other side of the door, only darkness. A cold wind blew through the passageway. Coraline made no move to walk through the door. "And he said that wasn't brave of him doing that, just standing there and being stung," said Coraline to the cat. "It wasn't brave because he wasn't scared. It was the only thing he could do. But going back again to get his glasses, when he knew the wasps were there, that's when he was really scared. That was brave." She took her first step down the dark corridor. She could smell dust and damp and mustiness. The cat padded along beside her. "And why was that?" asked the cat, although it sounded barely interested. "Because," she said, "when you're scared but you do it anyway, that's brave." The candle cast huge, strange, flickering shadows along the wall. She heard something moving in the darkness, beside her or to one side of her. She could not tell. It seemed as if it was keeping pace with her, whatever it was. "And that's why you're going back to her world, then," said the cat. "Because your father once saved you from wasps." "Don't be silly," said Coraline. "I'm going back for them because they're my parents, and if they noticed that I was gone, I'm sure they would do the same for me." "You know you're talking again." "Oh, how fortunate I am," said the cat, "in having a traveling companion of such wisdom and intelligence." Its tone remained sarcastic, but its fur was bristling, and its brush of a tail stuck up in the air. Coraline was going to say something like, "Sorry," or "Wasn't it a lot shorter walk last time?" when the candle went out as suddenly as if it had been snuffed by someone's hand. There was a scrabbling and a pattering, and Coraline could feel her heart pounding against her ribs. She put out one hand and felt something wispy like a spider's web brush against her face. At the end of the corridor, the electric light went on, blinding after the darkness. A woman stood silhouetted by the light, a little ahead of Coraline. "Coraline, darling," she called. "Mom," said Coraline, and she ran forward, eager and relieved. "Darling," said the woman, "why did you ever run away from me?" Coraline was too close to stop, and she felt the other mother's cold arms enfold her. She stood there, rigid and trembling, as the other mother held her tightly. "Where are my parents?" Coraline asked. "We're here," said her other mother, in a voice so close to her real mother's that Coraline could scarcely tell them apart. "We're here. We're ready to love you and play with you and feed you and make your life interesting." Coraline pulled back, and the other mother let her go with reluctance. The other father, who had been sitting on a chair in the hallway, stood up and smiled. "Come into the kitchen," he said. "I'll make us a midnight snack, and you'll want something to drink. Hot chocolate, perhaps?" Coraline walked down the hallway until she reached the mirror at the end. There was nothing reflected in it but a young girl in her dressing gown and slippers, who looked like she had recently been crying, but those eyes were real, not black buttons, and who was holding tightly to a burnt-out candle in a candlestick. She looked at the girl in the mirror, and the girl in the mirror looked back at her. "I'll be brave," thought Coraline. "No, I am brave." She put down the candlestick on the floor, then turned round. The other mother and the other father were looking at her hungrily. "I don't need a snack," she said. "I have an apple. See?" And she took an apple from her dressing gown pocket and bit into it with relish and an enthusiasm that she did not really feel. The other father looked disappointed. The other mother smiled, showing a full set of teeth, and each of the teeth was a tiny bit too long. The lights in the hallway made her black button eyes glitter and gleam. "You don't frighten me," said Coraline, although they did frighten her very much. "I want my parents back." The world seemed to shimmer a little at the edges. "Whatever would I have done with your old parents? If they have left you, Coraline, it must be because they became bored with you or tired. Now I will never become bored with you, and I will never abandon you. You will always be safe here with me." The other mother's wet-looking black hair drifted round her head like the tentacles of a creature in the deep ocean. "They weren't bored of me," said Coraline. "You're lying. You stole them." "Oh, silly, silly Coraline. They are fine wherever they are." Coraline simply glared at the other mother. "I'll prove it," said the other mother, and brushed the surface of the mirror with her long, white fingers. It clouded over as if a dragon had breathed on it, and then cleared. In the mirror, it was daytime already. Coraline was looking at the hallway all the way down to the front door. The door opened from the outside, and Coraline's mother and father walked inside. They carried suitcases. "That was a fine holiday," said Coraline's father. "How nice it is to not have Coraline anymore," said her mother with a happy smile. "Now we can do all of the things we always wanted to do, like go abroad, but we were prevented from doing by having a little daughter." "Hello, baby girl. You are interrupting, but I love you." "Yeah, you're so cute." I know. It is bedtime. We will go to bed soon." "I love you." So. She knows that I'm making fun. "And," said her father, "I take great comfort in knowing that her other mother will take better care of her than we ever could." The mirror fogged and faded and reflected the night once more. "See?" said her other mother. "No," said Coraline, "I don't see, and I don't believe it either." She hoped that what she had just seen was not real, but she was not as certain as she sounded. There was a tiny doubt inside of her, like a maggot in an apple core. Then she looked up and saw the expression on her other mother's face, a flash of real anger which crossed her face like a summer lightning, and Coraline was sure in her heart that what she'd seen in the mirror was no more than an illusion. Coraline sat down on the sofa and ate her apple. "Please," said her other mother, "don't be difficult." She walked into the drawing room and clapped her hands twice. There was a rustling noise, and a black rat appeared. It stared up at her. "Bring me the key," she said. The rat chittered, then it ran through the long open door that led to Coraline's own flat. The rat returned, dragging the key with it. "Why don't you have a key on your side?" asked Coraline. "There's only one key, only one door," said the father. "Hush," said the other mother. "You must not bother our darling's head with such trivialities." She put the key in the keyhole and twisted. The lock was stiff, but it clunked closed. She dropped the key into her apron pocket. Outside, the sky had begun to lighten to a luminous gray. "If we aren't going to have a midnight snack," said the other mother, "then we will need our beauty sleep. I am going back to bed, Coraline. I would strongly suggest that you do the same." She placed her long white fingers on the shoulders of the other father, and she walked him out of the room. Coraline walked over to the door at the far corner of the drawing room. She tugged on it, but it was tightly locked. The door of her other parents' bedroom was now closed. She was indeed tired, but she did not want to sleep in the bedroom. She did not want to sleep under the same roof as her other mother. The front door was not locked, so Coraline walked out into the dawn and down the stone stairs. She sat down on the bottom step. It was cold. Something furry pushed itself past her side in one smooth, insinuating motion. Coraline jumped, then breathed a sigh of relief when she saw what it was. "Oh, it's you," she said to the black cat. "See," said the cat. "Wasn't so hard recognizing me, was it? Even without names." "Well, what if I wanted to call you?" The cat wrinkled its nose and managed to look unimpressed. "Calling cats," it confided, "tends to be a rather overrated activity. Might as well call a whirlwind." "Well, what if it was dinner time?" asked Coraline. "Wouldn't you want to be called then?" "Well, of course," said the cat. "But a simple cry of 'dinner' would do nicely. See? No need for names." "Why does she want me?" Coraline asked the cat. "Why does she want me to stay here with her?" "She wants something to love, I think," said the cat. "Something that isn't her. She might want something to eat as well. It's hard to tell with creatures like that." "Do you have any advice?" asked Coraline. The cat looked as if it were about to say something else sarcastic. Then it flicked its whiskers and said, "Challenge her. There's no guarantee she'll play fair, but her kind of thing loves games and challenges." "What kind of a thing is that?" asked Coraline. But the cat made no answer, simply stretched itself luxuriantly and walked away. Then it stopped and turned and said, "I'd go inside if I were you. Get some sleep. You have a long day ahead of you." And then the cat was gone. Still, Coraline realized it had a point. She crept back into the silent house, past the closed bedroom door, inside which the other mother and the other father, she wondered, slept, waited? And then it came to her that, should she open the bedroom door, she would find it empty, or, more precisely, that it was an empty room, and that it would remain empty until the exact moment that she opened the door. Somehow that made it easier. Coraline walked into the green and pink parody of her own bedroom. She closed the door and hauled the toy box in front of it. It would not keep anyone out, but the noise somebody would make, trying to dislodge it, would wake her, she hoped. The toys in the toy box were mostly still asleep, and they stirred and muttered as she moved their box, and then they went back to sleep. Coraline checked under her bed, looking for rats, but there was nothing there. She took off her dressing gown and slippers and climbed into bed, and fell asleep with barely enough time to reflect, as she did so, on what the cat could have meant by a challenge. Chapter 6. Coraline was woken by the mid-morning sun full on her face. For a moment she felt utterly dislocated. She did not know where she was. She was not entirely sure who she was. It is astonishing just how much of what we are can be tied to the beds that we wake up in the morning, and it is astonishing how fragile that can be. Sometimes Coraline would forget who she was while she was daydreaming, that she was exploring the Arctic or the Amazon rainforest or darkest Africa, and it was not until someone tapped on her shoulder or said her name, that Coraline would come back from a million miles away with a start, and all in a fraction of a second, have to remember who she was, what her name was, and that she was even there at all. Now there was sun on her face, and she was Coraline Jones. Yes, and then the green and pinkness of the room she was in, and the rustling of the large painted paper butterflies that fluttered and beat its way about the ceiling, told her that she had woken up. She climbed out of bed. She could not wear her pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers during the day, she decided, even if it meant wearing the other Coraline clothes. Was there another Coraline? No, she realized, there wasn't. It was just her. There were no regular clothes in the cupboard, though. They were more like dressing up clothes, or, she thought, the kind of clothes that she would love to have hanging in her own wardrobe at home. There was a raggedy witch costume, a patched scarecrow costume, a future warrior costume with little digital lights in it that flickered and blinked, a slinky evening dress all covered in feathers and mirrors, and finally, in a drawer, she found a pair of black jeans that seemed to be made of velvet night, and a gray sweater the color of thick smoke, with faint, tiny stars in the fabric which twinkled. She pulled on the jeans and the sweater. Then she put on a pair of bright orange boots that she found at the bottom of the cupboard. She took her last apple out of her pocket of her dressing gown, and then took from the same pocket the stone with the hole in it. She put the stone in the pocket of her jeans, and it was as if her head had cleared a little, as if she had come out of some sort of a fog. She went into the kitchen, but it was deserted. Still, she was sure that there was someone in the flat. She walked down the hall until she reached her father's study, and discovered that it was occupied. "Where's the other mother?" she asked the other father. He was sitting in the study at a desk which looked just like her father's, but he was not doing anything at all, not even reading gardening catalogs as her own father did when he was only pretending to be working. "Out," he told her. "Fixing the doors. There are some vermin problems." He seemed pleased to have someone to talk to. "The rats, you mean?" "Oh, no, the rats are our friends. This is the other kind, big black fellow with his tail high." The cat, you mean?" "That's the one," said her other father. He looked less like her true father today. There was something slightly vague about his face, like bread dough that had begun to rise, smoothing out the bumps and cracks and depressions. "Really, I mustn't talk to you while she's not here," he said. "But don't you worry. She won't be gone often. I shall demonstrate our tender hospitality to you, such that you will not even think about ever going back." He closed his mouth and folded his hands in his lap. "So what am I to do now?" asked Coraline. The other father pointed to his lips. Silence. "If you won't even talk to me," said Coraline, "I'm going exploring." "No point," said the other father. "There isn't anyone anywhere but here. This is all she made, the house, the grounds, and the people in the house. She made it, and she waited." Then he looked embarrassed, and he put one finger to his lips again, as if he had just said too much. Coraline walked out of his study. She went into the drawing room, over to the old door, and pulled at it, rattled, and shook it. No, it was locked fast, and the other mother had the key. She looked round the room. It was so familiar, that was what made it feel so truly strange. Everything was exactly the same as she remembered. There was all her grandmother's strange-smelling furniture. There was the painting of the bowl of fruit, a bunch of grapes, 2 plums, a peach, and an apple, hanging on the wall. There was the low wooden table with the lion's feet, and the empty fireplace which seemed to suck heat from the room. But there was something else, something she did not remember seeing before. A ball of glass up on the mantelpiece. She went over to the fireplace, went up on tiptoes, and lifted it down. It was a snow globe with 2 little people in it. Coraline shook it, and set the snow flying, white snow that glittered as it tumbled through the water. Then she put the snow globe back on the mantelpiece, and carried on looking for her true parents, and for a way out. She went out of the flat, past the flashing light door, behind which the other Misses Spink and Forcible performed their show forever, and she set off into the woods. Where Coraline came from once you were through the patch of trees, you saw nothing but the meadow and the old tennis court. In this place the woods went on further, the trees becoming cruder and less tree-like the farther you went. Only 4 pages, and then we will go to bed, okay, baby girl? I know, you're being so patient right now. And I'm very good. Yes, I know. You're being very patient. If you stopped trying to eat my underwear, then I would let you go into the bedroom already. But you keep doing that. I know. You are so cute. I'm so patient. I love you. Pretty soon, they seemed very approximate, like the idea of trees, a grayish-brown trunk below, a greenish splodge of something that might have been leaves above. Coraline wondered if the other mother wasn't interested in trees, or if she just hadn't bothered with this bit properly, because nobody was expecting her to come out this far. She kept walking, and then the mist began. It was not damp like normal fog or mist, it was not cold, and it was not warm. It felt to Coraline like she was walking into nothing. I'm an explorer, thought Coraline to herself, and I need all the ways out of here that I can get, so I shall keep walking. The world she was walking through was a pale nothingness, like a blank sheet of paper on an enormous empty white room. It had no temperature, no smell, no texture, and no taste. Well, it certainly isn't mist, thought Coraline, although she did not know what it was. For a moment, she wondered if she might have gone blind. But no, she could see herself, plain as day. But there was no ground beneath her feet, just a misty, milky whiteness. "And what do you think you're doing?" said a shape to one side of her. It took a few moments for her eyes to focus on it properly. She thought it might be some kind of lion at first, some distance away from her, and then she thought it was a mouse close behind her, and then she knew what it was. "I'm exploring," Coraline told the cat. Its fur stood straight up from its body, and its eyes were wide, while its tail was down and between its legs. It did not look like a happy cat. "Bad place," said the cat. "If you want to call it a place, which I don't, what are you doing here?" "I'm exploring. Nothing to find here," said the cat. "This is just the outside, the part of the place that she hasn't bothered to create." "She?" "The one who says she's your other mother," said the cat. "What is she?" The cat did not answer, just padded through the pale mist beside Coraline. The shape began to appear in front of them, something high and towering and dark. "You were wrong," she told the cat. "There is something here." And then it took shape in the mist, a dark house which loomed at them from out of the formless whiteness. "But that's," said Coraline. "The house you just left," agreed the cat. "Precisely." "Maybe I just got turned round in the mist," said Coraline. The cat curled the high tip of its tail into a question mark, and then tipped its head to one side. "You might have done," it said. "I certainly would not. Wrong indeed." "But how can you walk away from something and still go back to it?" "Easy," said the cat. "Think of something walking around the world. You start out walking away from something and end up coming back towards it." "Small world," said Coraline. "It's big enough for her," said the cat. "Spiders' webs only have to be large enough to catch flies." Coraline shivered. "He said that she's fixing all the gates and the doors," she told the cat, "to keep you out." "She may try," said the cat, unimpressed. "Oh, yes, she may try." They were standing under a clump of trees now beside the house. Those trees looked much more lively. There's ways in and out of places like this that even she doesn't know about. "Did she make this place, then?" asked Coraline. "Made it, found it, what's the difference?" asked the cat. "Either way, she's had it a very long time. Hang on." It gave a shiver and a leap before Coraline could blink. The cat was sitting with its paw holding down a big black rat. "Not that I like rats at the best of times," said the cat, conversationally, as if nothing had happened. "But the rats in this place are all spies for her. She uses them as her eyes and hands." And with that, the cat let the rat go. It ran several feet, and then the cat, with one bound, was upon it, batting at it with one hand, one sharp-clawed paw. Batting at it hard with one sharp-clawed paw, while the other paw held the rat down. "I love this bit," said the cat happily. "Want to see me do it again?" "No," said Coraline. "Why do you do it? You're torturing it." Said the cat. It let the rat go. The rat stumbled dazed for a few steps. Then it began to run. With a blow of its paw, the cat knocked the rat into the air and caught it in its mouth. "Stop it!" said Coraline. The cat dropped the rat in between its two front paws. "There are those," it said with a sigh in tones as smooth as oiled silk, who have suggested that the tendency of a cat to play with its prey is a merciful one. After all, it permits the occasional funny little running snack to escape from time to time. How often does your dinner get to escape? And then it picked the rat up in its mouth and carried it off into the woods behind a tree. Coraline walked back into the house. All was quiet and empty and deserted. Even her footsteps on the carpeted floor seemed loud. Dust motes hung in a beam of sunlight. At the end of the wall was the mirror. She could see herself walking towards the mirror, looking reflected a little braver than she actually felt. There was nothing else inside the mirror, just her and the corridor. A hand touched her shoulder and she looked up. The other mother stared down Coraline with big black button eyes. "Coraline, my darling," she said. "I thought we could play some games together this morning. Now you're back from your walk. Hopscotch, happy families, Monopoly." "You weren't in the mirror," said Coraline. The other mother smiled. "Mirrors," she said, "are never to be trusted. Now what game shall we play?" Coraline shook her head. "I don't want to play with you," she said. "I want to go home and be with my real parents. I want you to let them go, to let us all go." "Yes, I know." "Do you promise to be well behaved?" "Do you promise?" "Okay." "No mischief." Have you... No, princesses. Opal? Mischief managed, as it were. The other mother shook her head very slowly. "Sharper than a serpent's tooth," it said, she said, "is a daughter's ingratitude. Still, the proudest spirit can be broken with love." And her long white fingers waggled and caressed the air. "I have no plans to love you," said Coraline. "No matter what, you can't make me love you." "Oh, let's talk about it," said the other mother, and she turned and walked into the lounge. Coraline followed her. The other mother sat down on the big sofa. She picked up a shopping bag from beside the sofa and took out a white, rustling paper bag from inside it. She extended the hand with it to Coraline. "Would you like one?" she asked politely. Expecting it to be a toffee or a butterscotch ball, Coraline looked down, and the bag was half filled with large, shiny black beetles, crawling over each other in their efforts to get out of the bag. "No," said Coraline, "I don't want one." "Suit yourself," said the other mother. She carefully picked out a particularly large black beetle and pulled off its legs, which she dropped neatly into a big glass ashtray on the small table beside the sofa, and popped the beetle into her mouth, then crunched it happily. "Yum," she said, and took another. "You're sick," said Coraline. "Sick and evil and weird." "Is that the way to talk to your mother?" her other mother asked, with her mouth full of black beetles. "You aren't my mother," said Coraline. Her other mother ignored this. Now, I think you are a little overexcited, Coraline. Perhaps this afternoon we could do a little embroidery together, or some watercolor painting, then dinner, and then, if you have been good, you may play with the rats before bed, and I shall read you a story and tuck you in and kiss you good night. Her long white fingers fluttered gently like tired butterflies, and Coraline shivered. No, said Coraline. The other mother sat on the sofa. Her mouth was set in a line. Her lips were pursed. She popped another black beetle into her mouth, and then another, like someone with a bag of chocolate-covered raisins. Her big black button eyes stared into Coraline's hazel eyes. Her shiny black hair twined and twisted about her neck and shoulders as if it were blowing in some kind of wind that Coraline could not touch nor feel. They stared at each other for over a minute. Then the other mother said, "Manners." She folded the white paper bag carefully so that no black beetles could escape, and then she placed it up in the shopping bag. Then she stood up, and up, and up. She seemed taller than Coraline remembered. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out, first the black door key, which she frowned at, and tossed into her shopping bag. Then a tiny silver-colored key. She held it up triumphantly. "There we are," she said. "This is for you, Coraline, for your own good, because I love you, to teach you manners. Manners maketh the man, after all." She pulled Coraline back into the hallway and advanced upon the mirror at the end of the hall. Then she pushed the tiny key into the fabric of the mirror and twisted it. It opened like a door, revealing a dark space behind it. "You may come out when you've learned some manners," said the other mother, "and when you're ready to be a loving daughter." She picked up Coraline and pushed her into the dim space behind the mirror. A fragment of beetle was sticking to her lower lip, and there was no expression at all in her black button eyes. Then she swung the mirror door closed, and left Coraline in darkness. I guess those chapters were a little bit longer than the first few. So, get some rest and do your best to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without knowing anything about you, then I can love you more than that. And I know that things are going to get scary. They're already scary. They're going to get scarier. But just remember that there are people out there who love you and will stay by you and will do their best to keep you safe. So, I love you very much.